Hello, lovelies. I'm just popping in here with a request to our listeners. As March 2025 looms, Miranda and I have been thinking a lot about the lasting impacts of the pandemic on parents, 5 years out from the 2020 lockdown. We've created an anonymous survey of parents that we're planning to use to inform a series of episodes in the spring and perhaps some published reporting. We'd be thrilled if you'd take 10-ish minutes to complete the survey, and we've included a link in today's show notes. Bonus points to anyone willing to share it with their parent communities. We want all the perspectives we can get. Many thanks for this and for your support of our work. Now enjoy the delightfully brilliant Nancy Reddy.
We can put monkeys in a cage and we're going to make a chart that's going to show how much time they spent clinging to the cloth mother. And that's going to show us something about what babies need. Those kinds of studies, they're kind of like internally verifiable, but I'm not sure that they're meaningful.
I'm Miranda Rake.
And I'm Sarah Wheeler, and this is The Mother of It All, where we take on motherhood through the lens of culture and culture through the lens of motherhood. Hi, Miranda Rake.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
There's like two things.
Yeah.
One, I can't get Aerosmith's Don't Want to Miss a Thing out of my head.
Whoa.
And it's kind of speaking, this connects to our guest today. It's haunting me.
Did you watch Armageddon recently? Is that?
No. Has anyone rewatched Armageddon?
We are planning to. We just haven't found the right moment yet. But yeah.
Is the moment like when every other movie has been watched already? Like, is that good? Is Armageddon good?
Well, I mean, for those of us who were teens when it came out, and it was like deeply moving to 13-year-old me.
I biked to the movie theater to see Armageddon with friends, and it was like a whole, Liv Tyler, icon.
She was having we actually were thinking about her the other day because we were talking about Lord of the Rings, and I was like, wow, she hasn't done anything, but she was such a big deal for like a minute there. Yeah. She was like so big.
I like to think she's one of those like Eva Mendes types that's just like chose life.
I agree. Well,
I think it's her choice, not the culture's, to have her kind of step back.
And she it feels like it would be lower stakes for her than anyone else because she already has as the heir to the Aerosmith fortune or whatever. She baby. Doesn't care.
And she already had like a career by 30. Like, Stealing Beauty, Empire Records.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've been talking with some friends about like going back and rewatching the kind of like late 90s, early aughts, films that meant the most to us. We did Romeo and Juliet. But Armageddon wouldn't be on that for me. But Stealing Beauty and Empire Records would. And those soundtracks slapped.
They did. And okay, so I was we've been thinking about rewatching Romeo and Juliet for like years now, and I really don't know if I can handle it.
It's a really low bar, Miranda. You can make your dream come true in 2 hours.
No, David wants to. I'm like, it will take me back to this like deep emotional place that I'm like, I don't know if I can go there.
Like reading your high school poetry, which actually I did out loud at the Romeo and Juliet note just to set the scene a little bit. It was bad. Yeah, I see. I know what you mean. It's like, I feel that way about music a lot. Yeah, even the soundtracks, when I think about the Stealing Beauty soundtrack, I don't know if I could, I'm afraid about what emotions I would feel. Now, is that because those emotions were completely insane, and unhealthy? Or is it because we've every year that we've aged since then, we've convinced ourselves to feel less so that we can function in
I think it's society? That one. I think it's the second one.
Then I think you got to watch it.
I know. Well, okay, so that leads me to this. I've been reading this book, the Wild Woman Archetype.
The Secret. Oh yeah.
No, yeah, from early 90s, like 93 or something. And it's Women Who Run with Wolves, the Wild Woman Archetype, something. Clarissa Pinkola Estes.
Ooh.
So it's called Women Who Run with the Wolves, Myths and Stories of the Wild Woman Archetype. And it's like all this stuff about, you remember how in the book Night Bitch, she talks about your flame, like the flame that goes out.
Yes.
And we've talked about like staying feral. Like I feel like this is in the ether, right? And so I wanted to read this book because of all of that. And like she's basically talking about, in slightly a strange way, I'm not sure how I feel about the book yet, but it's interesting. Like the idea that we all have this wild woman that's like part of us, and it's like with us as a child, and then as we grow, like the modernity demands that women are everything to everyone, and it slowly gets like stamped out. You know, I think that flame or that wildness or whatever, like if I watch Romeo and Juliet, that will come back to me like rushing, that will inhabit my body, that like rushing sensation. And like you said, I have to do like my daily life. I can't be like,
you're afraid that like, you know, at the scene where they're finally having sex in the bed with the white sheets.
No, not that.
You're gonna start like foaming at the mouth and go out and live in that witch house that's in Portland.
Yeah,
the witch house in the woods.
Right.
I don't know. I'd still be your friend. I mean,
Thank
I think
you.
we'd probably we'd have a lot to talk about. Well, is the fear that everything else would fall apart if you let your wildness actually, you know, be free?
I don't know. I don't really know. I feel like it's like it's difficult to reconcile that longing. You know, like I think watching that movie as a whatever I was, 10, 12-year-old, like all of those things were ahead of me. Some of it's just about midlife, right? You're like, oh, I'll fall in love someday.
Right. Versus adolescence too, you know, where
and now
adolescence is like neurologically a wild time.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess this is less
doing
wild.
all the drugs and alcohol that some
Which
of
I was
us
not.
were doing. I was.
Theater was my drug.
theater was my drug, but also drugs were my drug.
Really?
Yeah, drugs are really good drugs.
Oh.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, you know, because anything that kind of scares you, you know, I'm sorry, this is I don't actually believe this. I was about to say, you should do anything that scares you. I don't agree with that. Right. That is wrong. That was like some horrible, stupid inspo I was going to spew. But some things that scare you, particularly maybe that have to do with breaking out of, I don't know, some kind of myth about good womanhood, is interesting.
Yeah.
That is something to tell you.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I'm going to see my intuitive today after this record.
Oh, good.
So I am sure, and she is always trying to get me to be wilder. So I will come back to you with some tips.
Okay.
Yeah. Remember, she wanted me to drink too much tequila.
Oh yeah.
I can't even drink
that
any at all tequila.
Any is too
disgusting.
much.
I agree.
Yeah.
And she wanted me to like lie a little bit.
Oh my God.
She was like, you should have some lies. But I don't know. I'm into it. So
yeah. I like the push.
Continued.
Well, you know, Night Bitch is coming out soon. We're gonna go see that. We're gonna talk about it.
By the time you are listening to this, Night Bitch will be in the world, and the world will be completely different. Reproductive rights will be everywhere. Sorry, I was also up all night. The other thing I was going to say, the second thing is that I was up all night having like reproductive rights nightmares.
Oh no.
I read the like beautiful interview of Jessica Valenti in this latest issue of Mother Tongue magazine. And there was also a profile of like an OBGYN in Texas in the New Yorker.
Yeah. Why they're all the Exodus, the great Exodus.
Yeah, it's dark, man.
Mm-hmm. They also had a beautiful Night Bitch piece about Mariel. Oh, God.
Heller. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful profile of her making Night Bitch, and I learned so much, and it was so lovely, and it made me so excited to see the movie.
I'll read that right before I go to bed.
It'll make you feel better. It'll be a better one.
Dreams. Well, I'm gonna pop our guest on in here.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a lot that we've already kind of churned up. It speaks to the pervasiveness of the themes that our guest is kind of circling around. I first encountered Nancy Reddy through a piece that she wrote for Slate back in, I think, 2022, which kind of unpacked the myths of the so-called golden hour, those like moments of bonding right after birth that so many parents are told are this kind of litmus test for parent and child well-being and connection. But as Nancy reveals, turn out to be pretty inconsequential in the arc of parenting. And this willingness to take on these sacred cows of parenting research and advice was very, very appealing to me. Something I've attempted to do in my own work, but I don't think quite to the effect that our guest achieves. Nancy is the co-editor of the collection Long Devotion, Poets Writing Motherhood, which I know, Miranda, meant a lot to you in your early days of motherhood. Mm-hmm. She's also the author of the newsletter Write More, Be Less Careful, where she runs this wonderful series of interviews on the intersection of writing and caregiving. And we first had Nancy on last holiday season, where we discussed Kate McAllister, the mom from Home Alone, and our nostalgia for 90s parenting. If you haven't listened to this, it's a perfect time to revisit it. It's really interesting and fun, and I strongly recommend that episode. And now Nancy has written a book that I would say doubles down on this insistence that much of what we consider to be like this unimpeachable parenting advice is actually based on pretty shitty science. And I believe this book should be handed out probably like in every delivery room. I'm just going to go around with a basket of them. It's called The Good Mother Myth: Unlearning Our Bad Ideas About How to Be a Good Mom. Welcome, Nancy. We're so happy to have you here.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
Now, Nancy, who's caring for your kids right now? They're a little older than our kids, I think.
They are they're 4th and 6th grade.
Okay.
So they're at our wonderful public schools. My 6th grader rode his bike off to middle school this morning. I know. And it's cold out too. He was not all that happy about it, but I got suckered into dropping him off the other day. It's a mile away. So it's like a little bit of a long walk. But it is a very annoying drive with all the parent traffic. So
yes, that's the situation we have. Where like driving, it just takes you 2 minutes, but then you arrive at like Armageddon, basically.
Yeah, it's very silly. And so I was like, here are your gloves, bud. Good luck.
Yeah, what do you speak to us of the East Coast? You're like, does he have like a ski mask on?
Does
that not come out until February, March?
Called what do you call those things?
Balaclava.
Balaclava.
I mean, today's our first like actual cold day, I think. It was like 27, I think, this morning when he went to school.
Here.
Okay, yeah.
Fahrenheit?
We're freezing cold.
So it's cold. It's cold, but I got him some gloves. He's got like a coat with a hood. Bundle up, babe. Also, they were born in Wisconsin. They didn't live there very long because we moved, but they're born in Wisconsin. So I'm like, you can tough it out, guys.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can do it.
Also, there's no bad weather. There's only whatever bad clothes or
yeah. Well, and children who refuse to dress appropriately. So
this is what Forest Preschool did for us. Like, your kid will learn how to layer. Like, they won't learn their letters, they won't learn numbers, but they will learn how to layer. Like,
that's a life skill.
He'll be like, oh, I need layers. Like, we went to this Zoo Lights thing last night, and he was like, good thing I've got my layers. And he was the only one who was like appropriately dressed.
That's
I never should have sent my kid to tropical rainforest preschool. Because they just
probably has great skills in like poisonous bugs, though. So
yeah, they can spot the difference between a good snake and a bad snake. But I'm probably a bad parent for doing that.
Oh my God, that sounds amazing.
Speaking of this book, Nancy, I'm freaking out. I've already harassed you about it. But I've been reading quotes out loud sometimes to people, sometimes just to myself. I think that, it's in the title, but this idea of goodness, particularly how it relates to mothers, looms large in this book. So I'm wondering if you can talk to us about what, according to you and your research and your experience, are the myths we have about what it means to be a good mother, in addition to sending your kid to the right preschool, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, though, right? You have to pick the best preschool. Is the myth. I mean, the biggest thing I think is this idea that being a good mother means that you can kind of do it all yourself. That somehow when you
Mm.
transition from being a regular person to a mom, you become this kind of like superhero who just knows what to do and can do it all and doesn't mind, like doesn't mind being up at night, doesn't mind getting puked on, doesn't mind like never having a minute to yourself, because you just love your baby so much. And also, I think because you're kind of like designed, the mythology goes, for that work. Like there's something in your biology, there's something in evolution, there's something in the magic of pregnancy and birth that makes you suited to do all that work on your own.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm interested.
Snap, snap.
I loved this book. Of course, I was so excited to read it. I've been so excited for so long. And I'm really curious about your own experience of this idea of good mother and what it was like for you, because at least in the book it sounds like you had really internalized that idea almost without having an awareness at all that it had happened to you until your child was born, and you were performing a lot of things almost like unconsciously,
Yeah.
it seems like. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious about the moment when you, like, the scales fall from your eyes and you're like, wait, I'm trying to be a certain kind of goodness, or I'm trying to perform a certain kind of goodness. Why?
Yeah.
Was there like a moment like that? And then how did you go from that to interrogating these, psychologists?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think there was one moment, but I think you're right that for me, and I suspect this is true for a lot of other women, a lot of other mothers, that I had just internalized these ideas, which really are contradictory, right? Both that you can do it all your own and that it's natural, and you have to like study all the right experts. Like those things don't actually make sense if you kind of line them all up together. But I had really internalized that. And for me, like, I don't know, it's kind of a puzzle because like I grew up with a single working mom. I have
Yeah.
always worked. I was in grad school at the time. I certainly had no plans to like become a stay-at-home mom just because that wasn't what made sense for me. So I don't, at this like real tangle of these internalized bad ideas that I could kind of keep being myself and become this perfect, good mother who didn't have any needs of her own.
And you had those expectations for yourself, though. Like, do you think
Yeah.
when you were holding your baby, when you first met your
They got
first
to you.
baby, you sort of felt that like, do you think it was almost, I mean, you talk about being in grad school, like, I felt this way, like, almost like, well, I'm a good student, right? Like, I get
Yes.
A's, and I'm
Yes.
going to get an A in this.
Yeah, oh,
Like,
100%, right? And I think that's so much of the appeal of the kind of like data-driven, evidence-based approach to parenthood, right? Like you study
Mhm,
up, you do it, you like have a chart of,
mhm,
when your baby's sleeping and eating and pooping and all that, and like you
mhm,
can do it. Is this very like professionalized approach to motherhood, which I think feels comfortable, at
mhm.
least conceptually for some parents, but also really, in my experience, like sucks the joy out of kind of the whole undertaking. I would say, I
Mhm.
mean, you had asked about like, kind of the scale falling from the eyes, and I think it probably was like a long process in large part because that I went home with a baby and was like, oh no, like none of this is going the way I thought it would.
Mhm.
And I
Well, yeah,
remember
go ahead.
I remember one moment like really feeling bad for a long time because things were not going the way that I had expected they would, and because I was not getting an A, because that's not how it works. And I remember going to this, what does she call it? Milk and mimosas and milk. I can't remember, like at this gathering that another
Together? In
that
the
another
same
I think
mom.
glass?
you are the milk,
Oh,
and
Yeah,
then
I'm
you
the
drink the
yeah.
mimosas.
okay.
Like it
I
was
was
like
like,
it was
this
like
is a curdling risk.
yeah, no, that's
People need to
gross.
know.
But it was like a cute gathering of like moms and
Yeah.
babies. And one of the first ones that I probably had gone to, like that where you're in a group and you're like, what we have in common is that we all had unprotected sex around the same time. Like that's what
Yeah.
is our bonding.
Sometimes it's all you need.
I mean, right, and especially in those early
Yeah.
months. But I remember being at this
Yeah.
woman's house who I knew a little bit, but not well, and seeing formula on her counter
Mm.
and being like, what's going on? And she was like, it's crazy at work. Like, I don't have time to pump at work. We've started doing formula. It's great. And we're thinking like, like I am not judging her at all for that. Like, that sounds like a totally reasonable decision. So like, why would I judge myself? I think I went home and like ordered a canister of Similac like right then. And it
Yeah.
Wow.
made my life so much easier because I didn't have to like freak out when the baby was at daycare worrying that he was going to be hungry. And I think that feeling of
Yeah.
like, oh, I would never judge someone else as harshly as I'm judging myself
Oh, yeah.
was really revelatory for me.
Well, and you also talk in the book about how you had a, I don't know if you would describe a colicky baby. You had a baby that cried a lot. And, you know, when we had Jessica Slice on here talking about being a disabled parent, one of the things that she said that I think about the most is that, you know, one of the gifts of disabled parenting is like you've already kind of failed as a disabled person at meeting these ridiculous ideals of society. And so you don't imagine that you will achieve those as a parent, right? You've already kind of opted out from the myths about how we're supposed to be, right? Because, you know, for a variety of reasons. And so you are kind of in this more grounded place for things to not be perfect. And she talked about non-disabled parents kind of being crushed by that. You know, that when it didn't go well, they were so devastated. They hadn't had that practice of kind of detaching themselves from these unrealistic and harmful ideals that she had had. And, you know, I also, in a lot of the parents I work with, you know, we talk about how having like a disabled child does that to you too, right? And that they see their friends kind of, it'll take longer sometimes, but that at some point in the arc of parenting, you usually hit a place where you realize that, you know, whatever ideal you were trying to do or how you were shaping to your kid isn't going to happen. And then you have to mourn that and grieve it and decide whether or not you're going to blame yourself or blame your kid. And so to have that kind of out of the way is really helpful, but you encounter that really quickly. And so I wonder if your process of interrogating, as Miranda was calling it, happened earlier in that way. You know, just your ability to take the formula, I think is impressive, is something it would have taken me longer to do.
It still took me like 6 months. That was not early.
Okay. The time gap between these things is, we're seeing the montage.
Yeah, there still was like a lot of pumping and weeping before we got to that. No, but I think that's right. And I think like I thought about this a lot when my baby started daycare, which again was maybe at like 6 months. We had a babysitter the first couple of months when I was in school. But then he started going to this like really lovely, very 80s kind of in-home daycare when he was around 6 months. And I remember like kind of handing off my baby to this woman and being like, you know, what this time has proven to me is that I, in fact, do not have like some sort of special sauce. Like he did not respond to me in a way when he was brand new where like, I don't know if most babies do. I don't know. My second baby was very different. But it wasn't the thing I had imagined, which was like, I would have the magic touch and I would pick him up and he would be soothed.
Right. And they're like, he needs mama.
He needs mom. Yeah. No, I'm like, nope,
yeah.
that was not the kind of baby that he was. And so it did make it easier for me to send him to daycare because I was like, I don't know. Like, I'm doing my best. She's doing her best. Like, I think it's going to be fine. There is not actually anything magic about like me. And I think it's going to be really good for both of us for him to have someone else caring for him for a portion of the day. And that was really freeing.
Your book it's like a whodunit. I was at the edge of my seat about where these myths come from. And you use the word subterranean to kind of refer to how a lot of, you know, a few kind of prominent psychologists in, you know, mid 20th century and the second half of the 20th century, yes, I got that right. I did numbers. Kind of have kind of woven their ways so insidiously and so kind of, you know, so far from what the actual work was, into these myths and kind of shaping how we think about good motherhood now. So can you tell us a little bit about those folks and the the mystery you discovered there?
Yeah, I love this framing of it as a whodunit because it really is, right? Like, where did these bad ideas come from? The research that I was looking at in the book is really the kind of mid-century post-war psychoanalysis, psychologists, a lot of pediatricians who are also trained as psychoanalysts, and the way that their ideas circulated, especially in pop culture, about what a baby needs and what kind of mother women needed to become in order to give that to them. So I was looking especially at this kind of immediate post-war period where in the United States and also in the UK, men had been overseas fighting and women had been at home working in the war effort, which they were told was like their patriotic duty. People who were mothers sent their kids to state-supported daycare. And then the war ends and all the men come home and there's all this anxiety about getting them back into the workforce and getting women back at home with their kids. And suddenly there's all of this really powerful and popular science saying, not just is that a good idea for the culture or the economy or whatever, but also like it's science. You have to, go home and devote yourself to your baby.
So this wasn't an accident. I mean, that was, I think, a big takeaway for me that there was a cultural and political context to all of this research showing that, the mother is the most important person to the child. You can really fuck up your kid if the mother isn't fully on. That wasn't an accident.
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts to sound a little like, I don't know, galaxy brain conspiracy theory sometimes when I talk about it, but I really don't think it's an accident that the science that circulates, the science that like feels right, especially to journalists, is science that supports these kind of cultural imperatives. And you can see, I mean, even like if you look at the design of some of the studies, they're trying to figure out what kind of a caregiver a baby needs, but they only look at the mother. Like they're designed with these biases built in. John Bowlby, who we've talked about a little bit, is the founder of attachment theory, was also like a lifelong campaigner against daycare. Like he expended a lot of capital trying to argue for the closure of state-supported daycares. And I think it's not an accident that his research also found that what women needed to do was stay home with their kids.
Can you tell us a little bit about that research of John Bowlby's?
Yeah, so Bowlby's fascinating. He grows up in this kind of like upper crust British family. They're not royal, but they're like adjacent to the royals, and has this very kind of like, I always think like Downton Abbey childhood, where he is raised by a nanny. He sees his mother for like 1 hour at tea time. His nanny, who raised him when he was little, left the family when he was 4. And he talked about it like for the rest of his life. Like it keeps coming up in interviews how devastated he was. So like seriously, and I honestly don't even mean to make fun of that. Like that seems like it genuinely was devastating for him.
Sure.
And so he becomes a doctor. He ends up working during the war and afterwards at this clinic in London. And he's tasked by the World Health Organization with studying the mental health of homeless children who've been traumatized during World War II. He travels all around Europe, gathering information or ostensibly gathering information. But most of what he comes back with, he's like very selective in what he actually takes up in his research. He comes back with this message that actually what matters for the mental health of homeless children is the care of their mother. Like that it's
right.
It's
like
the
it
mother's
wasn't the war.
It's not the
like
war.
It's
not hunger. It's not like the trauma of, in some cases, being separated from their parents, in other cases being like, like underground during bombings. It's none of those things. It's the moms who are to blame. And that was really his kind of message for the rest of his life, was kind of like whatever is happening with babies, it's probably, or kids or teenagers, it's probably the mom's fault. He talked about mother's love as being like vitamins. So he had this really like biological way of thinking about it as well, that really like what happened in those first 3 years especially was the foundation of everything later.
I was just thinking about like how there's our culture hates nuance, right? So it's like it
Mm-hmm.
is always like the this or that, or like the messaging is like all this, and then people internalize that, or we take it as like, I've just read the headline, so what I understand is my baby has to touch my body every single minute for the first 6 months of their life, or whatever, and it's like, I think that some, when I was reading your book, which is so interesting, and I never knew anything about any of these people except Margaret Mead, and I think, like, imagining the culture that John Bowlby grew up in, and like, in a way, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on this, like, is it too kind to him to say, just his even valuing mothers at all as important was, in its way, in its moment, kind of unusual? Like, to even take an interest, to even be interested in children, or even be interested in mothers, like, because they're not very long before that, they were basically furniture, like the kids at least were furniture. So it's like, to even care about a child's well-being is a little bit unusual.
I mean, this is a body of research that, like, I think what you're getting at is really interesting, though, right? Which is like, can we care about children and care about mothers? I mean, this research, and I talk about Harry Harlow as well, who did the studies with the baby monkeys and the cloth mothers, found that, like, babies actually do need comfort, right? Like, you do actually need to hold and comfort and soothe them, right? I would argue it doesn't always need to be the mother doing that, but like, that was a really important finding. But a lot of these, mostly men, like, as they were studying, kind of ostensibly studying in babies and mothers, like, they weren't really, I don't think they really thought of mothers as people. I don't think they were valuing them as people. There's a great quote from one of the historians of science that I really love, Margaret Vacedo, who says that something like, in all of this research, the mothers were, quote, the great absentees. Like, the mother is just kind of this, I don't know, she is a piece of furniture.
Yeah. She's like a rocking chair.
Yeah,
and
like
a bottle.
she's slightly animate, but doesn't have any needs of her own, doesn't have any interests, really exists to serve the baby. So I don't know. I mean, and like, none of these men, I don't think, ever really thought about, they talk to mothers all the time. They traveled, they gave speeches, they gave interviews, they were quoted in women's magazines. But I don't know, probably with the exception of Spock, that they really listened to any of the women that they talked to. And they certainly didn't listen to the women, their wives, who were raising their children.
Yeah. Right. And didn't understand what it meant to say, never leave your baby to cry. Right. Like, it's like the idea of, even now, right, when I tell people about, like, I'm like, you should cry it out, and like, you can do it at like 16 weeks. And people are like, and you're like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's totally
if anyone's listening and hasn't read that article by Miranda, it's so good.
Please do.
Like, life-saving. It's so good.
But you have so much guilt.
When we had Dr. Catherine Moose on the podcast, she was talking about, that the enemies, for feminists, our enemies should not be children. But what the patriarchy does is it kind of pits us against children.
Yeah,
but the patriarchy is kind of, trying to control and screw all of us over. And so, you're right, Miranda, I think, in a loose sense, that in the early 20th century, we weren't interested in children and how they developed, for most of human history at all. And then some of this research and the work of Freud made us kind of look at children and think about them as kind of having their own consciousness, right? Which you can think of as child-centered. And a kind of more cynical view is that there were a lot of people, consciously and unconsciously, who were doing that in order to create more productive kind of members of society.
For
and
sure.
Thinking about children also as furniture, and mothers as kind of this, a cog to be, implemented in order to produce more, better kind of children for capitalism. We weren't going to have them work anymore in the factories in this country. And we had, we were kind of thinking of children's rights in that way. But that's because, how we were being productive members of capitalism was changing.
Yeah.
Right. And so we needed to kind of use child development for that.
Yeah, capitalism's probably the other villain, right? Like it's Freud and capitalism is like they're the ones underneath this whodunit.
Well, talk about the research a little bit, Nancy, too, because I mean, it's like, analyzing the people is fascinating and it's not disconnected. But, I have my own, I had my own kind of like scales coming off the eye experience about research on children, which is essentially that I was trained as a school psychologist. I took child development. I learned about the science of parenting, and it was all of these folks that you're talking about, Nancy. Everybody in here was a heavy hitter. They're like the Mount Rushmore of child psychology that maybe Miranda, as for a lot of parents who don't study this, you only get the subterranean.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of us in the field, we know where these ideas come from. And I took it all as gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became a parent.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, this doesn't make any sense. You can't, well, let me go back to these studies and with what I know about the kind of context in which children develop and all of the little variables. I don't know. I just don't buy it anymore. But Nancy, you made a really good case for that. So
yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm obsessed with is the question of how we know what we know, which is a kind of methodological question. Like, what kinds of studies are we designing in order to, pursue whatever research questions we have? And it's also a disciplinary question, right? Psychology approaches research in a particular way. Anthropology and sociology approach it very differently. And the people that I'm writing about were all approaching things from a kind of lab science perspective, right? We can put monkeys in a cage and we're going to make a chart that's going to show how much time they spent clinging to the cloth mother. And that's going to show us something about what babies need.
That's Harlow's work.
Yeah, that's Harry Harlow's work.
Uh-huh.
Mary Ainsworth designs the strange situation, which is the protocol that tests what your attachment style is. And, a baby and their caregiver or a toddler and their caregiver go into a room, the caregiver leaves, and, how the baby responds or the toddler responds tells you the quality of the attachment, and thereby
we watch videos of that in grad school.
Yeah,
just in case anyone's worried it isn't still relevant.
Yeah, no, still relevant. All that. I mean, go to Instagram; it's everywhere. And that kind of research is very clear. It's very easy to replicate. You can train grad students on it. You can publish in it. You can build a whole career doing that kind of research. But I'm not really convinced, based on my research and my lived understanding of kids and families, that those kinds of studies really tell us anything beyond, they're kind of internally verifiable, but I'm not sure that they're meaningful.
Right.
I wonder too about, as we talk about this, thinking about how so much of this gets trickled down in headline form via TikTok or Instagram, the field of psychology may be doing very valid explorations of questions of personality, causality, et cetera, child development, but human development. But I think about this across science journalism too. It's where you grab a headline from a tiny study, right? That's like we were talking about vitamins, right? It's maybe taking vitamin C makes you not get a cold. And then here we are 5 years later, and it's no, that's not true. But it was just one tiny study, or whatever. And I feel
does vitamin C not keep you from getting a cold?
Not really. Not
I've
taking
wasted my
it.
life. Okay, go on. Point verified.
But I think that I wonder if also what is wrong is everyday people grabbing a tiny study, a tiny finding from a tiny study and saying, I'm going to build my entire life and sense of self-worth on whether or not I'm living up to this tiny little suggestion at the end of this psychological study.
Yeah. And I think journalists, right? which is,
Yeah.
I just think it's so, as you say, it's so easy to lose the nuance or to hold on to the thing that's the grabbiest,
Yeah.
that's going to circulate the most. And certainly that's what happened, you know, with Harlow's research, for example. I mean, the research on the monkeys is incredibly complicated and layered and nuanced. And really what people took away from it, both Bowlby and like the popular press, was like, look at this good mom. She is there all the time.
Hmm.
By the way, which was a bunch of wires with cloth on them.
Yes, yeah, like a little
Yeah,
like a
okay.
wire terry cloth, like a little
In a
wire
monkey cage.
cone
It made me
covered in
so
terry cloth.
sad.
Okay, and so they learned,
So
right,
sad.
that the monkey that was just the monkey mom that was just wires, even if it had the milk, the
Mm-hmm.
baby's monkeys preferred the cloth one.
Yeah.
And so that is then they're making a I'm just trying to trace too, like the red lines on
Yeah.
the bulletin board, right? From the TikTok, the Instagram post that you talked about earlier at the top of the episode, right? To this
Yeah.
is like that. Then they're saying, so even if we said that what they found in those studies was statistically accurate,
Mhm.
which,
Oh, it is.
by
Yeah.
the way, as someone who's done research, is already
Oh,
a
okay. Well,
little,
the
a
math is not
little
my strong suit.
could not be so, valid,
Okay.
right? Like what we talk
They've
about
got nice charts,
statistical.
though.
Right, right. But sometimes those differences are way smaller than you would think,
Ah,
right? And again,
okay.
we're not talking about anything in real life. We're
Yeah.
talking about monkeys going to a cloth mom. So first of all, we're deciding that we're interpreting for the monkeys that choosing the cloth mom equates to them wanting physical love and comfort, right? And love. That they see that as
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
Big interpretation.
Oh, yeah. And Harlow was super clear about that. Like, I am
Okay.
studying the nature of love. That is what he believed he was doing.
Then we're making another leap to humans.
Mhm.
Then we're ignoring all the other context that a baby is raised in because we're not raised in cages with
Yeah.
only
Nor
one
should we
caregiver,
be. Yeah.
right? And then we're kind of connecting it to modern parenting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Cool.
I think there are these, like, I mean, it sounds wild when you spell it out like that. But I think there's a series of both, like Harlow appears on TV. There's a CBS show, and he, they have these video of him with these monkeys in the cages and talking about, oh, this is what, a mother, this is what a baby needs, this is what a good mother looks like. There's all this stuff in the popular press. And it's like this game of telephone, right? Where like that image just kind of grabs hold of the popular imagination. And I think even if you haven't heard of Harlow, even if you don't like can't picture that cloth mother, I think that image of, the good mom holding her baby, not needing anyone else is a pretty pervasive one.
And by the way, it's a mom, right? We
Oh,
also made
100%,
that assumption
100%.
that,
Yeah.
that the baby interprets that wire cloth shape as a woman.
Yes. Oh,
And
definitely.
Didn't you say in the book that Harlow actually did talk about, men
Yeah.
as fathers?
Yeah.
And what happened there?
Well, again, like this is just an example of the kind of nuance that gets lost. Like even in the first talk that he gave about this research, where the main takeaway is, I have discovered the nature of love. Look at these babies and their cloth mothers. Towards the very end, he says something like, well, if lactation is a variable of negligible importance or, some kind of scientific thing, even fathers could be good mothers. Like if you don't have to actually have breasts or have given birth,
Yeah.
you could care for a baby.
Right.
But he didn't.
Right. Couldn't that have shown that you don't need to have the food?
Well, exactly. Right. I mean, that is actually like a genuine takeaway from his research, but it's not one that other than like that moment at the end of the speech, or elsewhere that ever really gets picked up again.
Yeah.
Everyone else kind of moves on with the takeaway about the mother, the warm, patient, continuously available, infinitely tender, blah, blah, blah mother.
You mentioned this morning you got fed an Instagram post. What was it again?
Oh, it was a post. It was a mom holding a baby. A little baby, I would say, maybe like 2 months old. And the text was something like, did you know that for the first 6 to 7 months, the baby doesn't know that it's a separate person from I think the word was caregiver, but I was like, you're not talking about a caregiver there. And it felt like this very the way that I think a lot of the messaging that's reaching us right now, or at least that finds its way to me in the algorithm, is both like applauding the work of mothers and talking about how important we are and how essential we are, but also serving this message of like, therefore, you have to be the only one to do this. If your baby doesn't know that he's a separate person from you, you're not really a separate person either. And by the way, if that's 6 or 7 months, like, I don't know if I know anyone who had that kind of like parental leave in this country, right? So like if your baby needs you for the first 6 to 7 months, like literally all the time, I don't know. Are you
Yeah.
giving up your job? Probably. And I just think it's, I don't know, even this stuff, it's like we haven't figured out how to talk about. And I hope that, I don't know, this feels like a big ask, but like I hope my book is like kind of nudging in this direction, but I feel like we haven't figured out a good way to talk about how like powerful and important and transformative and life-changing mothering is without turning mothers into furniture, as Miranda said, right?
Right. Or
Yeah.
like also if your love was great enough, then you would do
Yeah.
this. But you're also saying that, by the way, the research that this Instagram post is citing is not, that is there. We do not have that research.
I mean, I think that's that to me, and it's not citing a source, but I think it's calling up this Freudian
What?
idea of, yeah, exactly. This Freudian idea of like the mother and the baby being merged. This is what Winnicott, who's the guy behind the idea of the good enough mother, like this is what Winnicott talks about as primary maternal preoccupation, that there's this postpartum state of just like total merging with your baby that like would be illness at any other time in your life, but in new mothers it's essential. And if you don't do it, you're like, risking your baby. And I think that's a kind of mythology that is really dangerous too, right? Like if you feel totally unhinged in the first couple of months of motherhood, that
That's
probably means
just
you're doing it right.
nature
Like,
kicking in.
man,
You
yeah.
just turned into a pile of wire and cloth.
Like thinking about why that post is appealing, right? Like your child doesn't know,
Yeah.
I can imagine what it speaks. I can think of so many things, but again, thinking about, late stage capitalism, some of us can't afford not to go back to work after a week
Yeah.
or two, right?
Yeah.
And then some of us can't afford to go back to work and have to stay home. And so it's not necessarily a choice whether or not you are the sole caregiver.
Yeah.
You may be stuck with your baby.
Yeah.
And so receiving content like that tells you you are doing the right thing. And
that's a message that could make you feel really powerful and essential, I think.
And even if you're struggling with postpartum depression or whatever, you're seeing this thing that says you are doing the right thing. And so that's feeding this part of you that's like, okay, well, I'm miserable, but at least I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
I relate to that. I had a baby. I
Sure.
had a baby too in like kind of the middle of like a ambivalent professional time, and you're like, oh, I could be important here.
Yeah.
I could be important here. And we were talking earlier about being the most important person and the seductiveness of that too.
Yeah.
I mean, I really feel that you kind of, you lose something. Miranda's dying to talk about Margaret Mead and allo parenting. So we'll hop into that.
Yeah.
But to connect to that, there is something I don't think really at stake, but I think given the cultural context at stake when a mother gives up or loses her primary importance, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that my kids, I have definitely had friends who say, well, when I go away, it's just hard because like I'm the only person, like my husband can take care of my kids. Usually these are people in hetero marriages, by the way. But I know like if they're hurt or something, or if something really goes down, it has to be me. And I have felt this failure at that not being true in my family. And it must be because I was so depressed and, in those early months of having my child. And because I watched The Office.
You biffed the
breastfed.
attachment. You biffed it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay.
No, but I think what, like I'm looking for like that both things can be true, right? Like that a
Yes.
mother is very important. You are very important. But that and you know, I want to also find the place where the idea that you will instinctually feel happy and know exactly what to do, I think is a total myth, of course. But I also think I do believe now, and maybe it's obnoxious, but as a mom speaking to new moms, like you do know what to do. You do know what to do. You have it in you.
One of the things that was like most genuinely helpful to me in that like kind of like early motherhood where this was like 2013, so I was Facebook messaging everyone I could find, like, you have a kid, tell me what to do.
Same.
A friend of mine from high school whose kids are a couple years older than mine said something like, I know it doesn't feel like it, but you know you're maybe the best. Because I was doing so much. I was like messaging my pediatrician all the time. I was like calling the doula, like all of these things. And that was both that she said, you might not feel like it, but you do. And I think the message, or at least what I would add to that now, is like, and you learn that through doing the care, right? It wasn't because I was the one who had given birth. It was because I was the one who was caring for my kid.
Because I was making a face kind of to.
I know. I was like, I'm going to get there, Sarah. I'm going to get there. I think about, there's a phrase that Chelsea Conaboy, who wrote the book Mother Brain, uses, where she talks about the mother brain being earned by care. Which also means that anyone can do it, right? Like if you're a dad, and spend time with the baby, if you're an aunt, if you're a good friend, like you can also. And that was another thing where like seeing a really dear friend spend time with the baby and like figure out things about what's going on with him before I could.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, like Anna, like she's there, she's paying attention, she can help me.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's caring. Like the care is what teaches.
And she doesn't have the, you know, that she's not seeing.
And she slept last night, and she's not like hormonally. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
all of
this
those
brings us to. It always comes back to Darla for me, because our beautiful nanny who came into our lives when Nellie, my second, was 8 weeks old. And I tell Darla all the time now that I learned about Nellie by watching her care for Nellie. Because I was depressed, I was overwhelmed, I was freaking out. Griffey needed me all the time. I could barely see Nellie, and I learned how to take care of Nellie by watching Darla with her. And but that brings us to Margaret Mead and her idea of many warm, friendly people, which also now, what was so striking to me was, Nancy, this came from her own mothering experience, right?
Margaret Mead was kind of like the surprise of the book. She kept coming up in all of these places. And late in the book, I was like, I need a Margaret Mead chapter. Yeah. And I'm so glad that I did. And so when she was a mother, she really decided, and she argued this in her research as well, that what children really need is not one perfect mom, but many warm, friendly people. And she practiced that in her life. She always surrounded her daughter with other adults very carefully. They lived oftentimes in what she called a composite household, where they actually there was co-housing. But she got that idea from her research. And I think that's important because like she was doing research too, in the same way that Bowlby and Harlow and Ainsworth were.
And she's an anthropologist.
Exactly. She's an anthropologist. So she's 40s? Not in a lab. She's earlier than that, like the 20s.
Okay.
She was observing communities over time, and she was really seeing the context. She was seeing relationships. And I think that's really important. I think if you really want to learn about any relationship, you have to do it over time. And what she found, and what other people who've studied anthropology of childhood found, is that basically like there is almost no culture in the world where the way that we raise children is by putting like a mom and a baby in a house and leaving them alone. Like that's not culturally what happens really anywhere. Or a cage.
Well, I just loved, it was such a beautiful chapter, and it was so refreshing to hear a person taking her work and applying it to her motherhood, as opposed to a man observing some moms and some babies in cages. It was so beautiful. And to think of her really living very much outside of the box of womanhood, motherhood at that time. And it was just a lovely little note, and your own evolution as a mother with your second child to have more warm, friendly people. Like it sounds like kind of welcoming a community.
Right.
Anyway,
Your progression
yes.
was not to like nail early attachment
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
you know, and you talk about this. I had this too of like I'll have another kid and then I'll nail and then I'll just fucking zero in on that infant, you know, with nothing but
Yeah.
endorphins
Yeah.
and it'll all work
Yeah.
out. And that
Oh
wasn't available to
man.
you.
It's so
Well,
hard to get outside of that. Like
Yeah.
yeah.
what I've learned from the first baby is like you can't really do it right. You just try your best and blah blah. But maybe with the
here I am
second.
again.
Oh my Lord. It's so true.
Thank you for understanding that though.
Yeah. What I love about Margaret Mead and the way you talk about her, and you also talk about her daughter's experience and how like that allo-parenting experience wasn't perfect either.
Yeah.
But I think that it comes
Yeah.
back to this idea that we're, as opposed to a lot of the research that either, you know, isn't using humans or is putting humans in very artificial situations without the context of their lives, we're talking about human beings here.
Yeah.
So like, we're not, the alternative isn't this lab designed control, right? We are talking about, like, I was kind of raised in a bit of an allo parenting situation,
Okay.
something akin to co-housing. We had a lot of caregivers we were related to and not related to in our home. That meant a lot to us. My parents weren't really available to do, you know, full on attentive parenting. I mean, definitely not to like the Bowlby extent, but not probably even to the extent that was actually good for us. And so they brought in these other folks. You know, they had five kids, and they worked, and it just wasn't a possibility. And so, given what they could do, their personalities, their psychology, where they were in their marriage, where they were professionally, you know, they made choices that I think ended up, for the most part, good for their kids. And they tried to correct for what, you know, their limitations were. And so we're not comparing in a study my parents, we're not taking like what they would be like if they absolutely had, you know, no lives, right? We're talking about real people. And so I think that to me is like often the drawback. I love this one concept from psychology. I don't know if you got into this. Yuri Bronfenbrenner, who developed an ecological model of child development, which it's basically imagine like a kind of nesting doll of circles. And so it's about how all of these, not just the immediate, you know, parent and school kind of affect kids, but also how larger things affect the kids and the parents, and how the relationships between those systems affect children. And so you can't really study that in a lab, but it tracks better for me.
Yeah.
That's my rant.
Well, beautiful.
Nancy, I want to ask you for cultural recommendations. I'm wondering if there's a part of your book, it's just a few sentences that I referred to in my notes as your mic drop. And if you can see that second paragraph that starts with the word despite, could you just finish that paragraph starting with the word once for us in your finest reading voice?
Once you start looking at the research, it feels less and less likely that a bunch of men, and the occasional woman, to be fair, in post-war England discovered the only right way to raise a child, and that it just happened to entail leaving all the work to a woman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Go. We need like a pump.
Yeah, there it is. Well, thank you for writing this. I think that, I mean, I told you this, but I think that there's a lot of ways, given my background in psychology, that I felt like kind of this was the parenting book that was missing most for me.
Nancy, it's out in January. People can pre-order now.
Yeah,
right?
I would love it if you would.
So it might make a fabulous holiday gift for the mother in your life.
You can buy it for a mom you love.
There you go.
We're doing a really fun like pre-order celebration of little book plates that we're going to send out to people. And I'm doing a Zoom event with Maggie Smith in February on the 23rd. So if you like bought the book for a friend, for your own mom, your sister, whatever, you could get it in the new year, and then you could come to the like Zoom party together in February when it's going to be horrible, and that would be a fun thing to do.
There you go.
In the gloom and the gray.
I will say it's very readable, and you weave your personal story in.
Yeah, that was the goal, is like to make it be you know, it's got this memoir kind of like narrative to it that hopefully is compelling.
Well, we'll link to that event
Cool,
and
thank you.
to all sorts of other things in the show notes. And Nancy, before we bid you adieu, do you have any culture recommendations for us that you've been enjoying, either as a person or as a parent with your kids?
I'm not sure if this is a recommendation, but I guess I'll go ahead and share. You know, so asterisk, think about your own kids and where they are, if this makes sense or not. But last year when I was here, we talked about Home Alone, which
Yes.
I like maintain is a perfect Christmas movie. I watched it again on
Agreed.
Thanksgiving with my kids. Great movie. This year we watched for the first time another excellent Christmas movie, Die Hard, which we've been talking about for a long time.
The perfect Christmas movie, in my opinion.
A great Christmas movie. We did a lot of like, my kids are 9 and 11. And we're pretty permissive in terms of like kind of media they can consume. Yeah, they did. There was some boobs that they like hid from.
There's a lot of boobs in my house anyway.
It's violent, but in a way that's like kind of basically cartoony. It's got good, evil. Are they like German? Are they Russian? Like it's a very like kind of good bad guy.
Alan
holds
Rickman
up
is
well.
A fabulous bad guy.
So good.
90s violence is nothing.
Yeah, it's not. I don't do gore, and it's not upsetting. Like it's for me, and I'm pretty
in
lazy.
like Tide commercials, my kids see people be like dismembered.
Yeah,
that is 2024 violence.
One thing that I've learned watching a lot of like 80s and 90s like TV shows and movies with my kids is that usually it's more like the light sexual harassment, or sometimes very overt sexual harassment that is a problem. But we've talked about that a lot. Yeah, because my younger kid will be like, that's sexist, or like, that's racist. So, you know.
Okay, Nancy, we thank you for being on again. We look forward to your third visit. We'll have you come back again. Thank you for writing this book and talking to us about it.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks for listening to The Mother of It All. And like my mom always said, go find some other warm, friendly people. The Mother of It All is produced by Opus Knox Media with music from It's Electric. If you liked this episode, why not send it to a friend right now? Go on, we'll wait. You can follow us on Substack at themotherofitall.substack.com, where subscribing will get you episodes and bonus posts in your inbox and connect you with the Mother of It All listener community. Plus, become a paid subscriber and get a hot off the presses Mother of It All canvas tote. We're also on Instagram at The Mother of It All, and you can email us anytime with ideas or feedback at motherculturepod@gmail.com.